the session. Thank you very much to our panel, and I will hand over to you in a second to ask you to introduce yourselves and to position your thoughts on the topic for today. We're here today to discuss how technology can support the food and drink industry, both in Scotland and UK. Food and drink is one of the UK's key industries, a major employer and a key exporter. In Scotland alone, food and drink is worth over £14 billion each year and supports 1 in 5 manufacturing jobs. Overall in the UK, it's worth around 120 billion to the economy, and British farmers supply 61% of food eaten in the UK. What we want to look at today is how is technology being used to help the sector? What can we do to drive innovation and productivity? How do we ensure that we are developing agri-tech and that we're developing agri-tech in a way that supports the growth of the sector, works for the smaller producers and supports a resilient system that benefits both the environment and the economy? I am delighted to welcome Polly Purvis, OBE, Director of ScotFin and Intelligent Growth Solutions, to the session today, and Michael. And without further ado, and Ruth, sorry, I will hand over to each of you, starting with Polly, if I may, to introduce yourselves and give us some of your thoughts.
Thanks, Jane. Hi, I'm Polly Purvis, and as Jane said, I work at Intelligent Growth Solutions. We're a vertical farming specialist based in Scotland, but with markets around the world. I think the opportunities that I see in agri-tech and in using technology to support the food and drink sector are really numerous. We've started to see a whole range of new ways of utilizing data, digital sensors, software right across the agriculture and food and drink industries. One of the key challenges for Scotland, of course, is access to labour. And we have traditionally been very reliant on our friends in Eastern Europe for much of that labour. And with the current economic environment and political environment, that's likely to change quite dramatically. So for very many people working in both in the agriculture sector and horticulture, but also in food and drink, that's a real challenge. So the use of technology to replace the labour that has been used in relatively unskilled roles. I mean, they are skilled, but they're on that lower skills level. I think is going to be a key issue and a key opportunity. What we do at IGS is we build vertical farms, and that's the equivalent of taking a standard field, cutting it into sort of snooker table size pieces, and then stacking it up one above the other. So you create an indoor farm. The environment there is completely controlled, and we use a combination of sensors and lights, low voltage lights, to create a growing environment which is extremely clean and means that you need very little in terms of human intervention. We use robotics to move the trays around, to do the watering systems, etc. And the product that comes out the other end is therefore very clean, very high quality, and you don't need to use all those nasty pesticides and things that we tend to use in traditional farming. So that's a great example of how you can use technology to improve food production, but still create really high quality products. I think if you look at other parts of the farming sector, I remember probably 10 years ago, if not longer ago, ICE Robotics was spun out of Strathclyde University using sensors to monitor animal health through putting sensors on ear tags or on collars. And that means that when you've got cattle and sheep out in the field, and in some cases in Scotland ranging a long way away, you can keep on top of their health conditions and monitoring them without having to necessarily have a shepherd out there all the time, having to check around the flock. In the soft fruit sector, which is so important to the east of Scotland, we're now seeing very, very smart robots beginning to do strawberry picking, but also simpler robotic systems for doing weeding in the fields. Again, those are all quite backbreaking, labour-intensive jobs that are not necessarily hugely skilled, but actually are things that are really important in the process. So again, we're sort of using technology to take away some of those mundane roles. We've seen the use of sensors in farm machinery, such as combine harvesters, being able to absolutely tell when that crop's ready for cutting, rather than just going, finger in the wind. Are we right? Should it be another day? Was it yesterday? So that ability to take data and use sensors to collect that data and then transfer that into operating systems that then make sure we're getting optimal yields and optimal cutting in the case of harvesting, that I think is really, really impressive. And again, I think in the whole world of animal health, there are huge opportunities to use data, sensors and software to make sure that we are actually improving the conditions that we keep beasts in, and whether that's everything from chickens right through to beef cattle, etc. So I think there's lots and lots of opportunities. I think there's more to come. We're seeing the use of drone technology as well to monitor crops. So yeah, I think it's all in front of us, and I will pass on now to Michael, if that's appropriate.
Michael, if you are ready, and apologies, my introduction got away from me. We are delighted that Michael can join us from Topolytics this afternoon. You're doing a huge amount of interesting work in this area with a number of key companies in Scotland, like McSween's and others.
Yes, and we're also working with some of the world's biggest consumer product companies as well, some of whom are food companies. Yeah, so basically we're aggregating and analysing and generating insights into all of the world's waste. So we're looking at it as a kind of global kind of system of materials movements and processing and disposal, because still globally 60% or more than 60% of that material still goes into a landfill or a waste dump or is leaking into the environment. So that we're very much coming at it from that point of view. So we're using machine learning, mapping and other sort of technologies to actually build a much better level of trust in the data that currently exists on all of that material in order to drive better commercial and environmental outcomes for that material at scale. And specifically then within the context of food and drink, I mean, clearly there's a whole range of issues there in relation to waste and the recovery thereof of that material. Clearly you've got primary production where there's a lot of food waste within the system, and that's across the whole value chain, both from the production end right through the distribution and then into the retail end. And actually, from a sort of global carbon emissions point of view, that is one of the biggest contributors to carbon emissions. But then you've also got the packaging and the materials piece attached to that. So where you've got sort of companies that are selling food products through supermarkets, for example, there's a whole range of different sort of packaging types, transit packaging, secondary packaging, primary packaging, that basically is attached to those products. And what we're seeing is those companies, particularly some of the bigger sort of multinationals, are actually starting to realize, well, actually, that particularly the plastic packaging, that material is the material that's kind of leaking into the oceans and leaking into the environment. So they realize there's a kind of risk attached to that. So not only is there an environmental risk, but there is clearly a huge opportunity to recover that material. So there's a big cost opportunity, there's a big materials efficiency opportunity. And again, if you're looking at it from the point of view of just looking at Scotland, 74% of Scotland's carbon emissions are the result of the production, the consumption, and the use of goods and materials. So when we're looking at carbon emissions globally, we mustn't lose sight of the materials piece that's attached to that. And that's basically what we're trying to do. We're saying that material system is currently not necessarily helpful in terms of driving what you might call a circular economy. So we're really trying to sort of address that with data analytics, machine learning, and we're pulling in data from many, many different sources. So that's where we see a big challenge within the food and drink sector, but absolutely a big opportunity to use technology to make the system more efficient, but certainly from the point of view of materials we use.
I didn't realize it was 74% of our emissions that were from that source. That's fascinating. Ruth, last but not least, Director of Unique Marketing, thank you for joining us.
Hi there, thanks for having me. So I come from an even different aspect, if you like. We are a marketing agency based in Edinburgh, and we do a lot of work in the food and drink sector around helping those businesses to grow and developing their online audience and offering. So, for example, we had one client who was previously selling food and drink into wholesale trade industry, and it took me 3 years to persuade them that we should also have a retail side of the business so we could sell directly to customers. A long time to persuade them to do that, and I think initially that was because they were, as far as they were concerned, the business was ticking along. They were quite happy with what they were doing, and it took me a while to convince them of the opportunity of that. But thankfully, over the last 2 years, we've been developing that further. And when we went into lockdown, they lost about 75–80% of their trade overnight because it was so heavily weighted in that trade industry. Though when I was speaking to them last week, they were saying, you know, we wouldn't actually still be here as a business if it hadn't been for the fact we had developed that retail side. So I think from my experience and perspective, it's really about how digital marketing and technology can help, particularly, you know, small and medium-sized food and drink companies to expand their growth, if you like. We've got another campaign that we're just about to launch, and actually the UK government's funding, or the loans, not the funding, the loan that has been made available has given a number of businesses an opportunity to invest in their marketing in a way actually they hadn't previously. And I think a lot of companies, particularly as now you don't have your food markets, your exhibitions and things as a marketing or sales channel for your company, have had to very quickly establish and work out actually what are our channels of marketing going to be. And that's where we've been trying to support the businesses we're working with. So with the new campaign that we're about to launch, they've got an audience of about 1.5 million people that we've identified on social media that they can actually target. And there's not many other marketing channels that would allow you to get that kind of reach. So I think it's really about educating people in that industry of the opportunities that are there, and also positioning Scotland, which I think we do phenomenally well, but continually developing that message around what a great country of food and drink producers we are. But for me, it's about that investment and support for those smaller companies to actually be able to help them to take that next, what feels like quite a big step for a lot of them, into digital marketing, and creating that online experience for customers is really, really important as well. But there's some great and huge opportunities out there for them.
I think the idea of opening up new channels to customers on that scale, you know, around 1.5 million from a more localized market, is hugely interesting. I think there's also a question in there. We do have a reputation in Scotland, I think, for quality produce and quality of production. How do we keep that? How do we keep that, but develop a reputation for innovation and excellence in the way we apply those technologies? Polly, could I come to you with that one? Oh, Polly, I think we're on mute.
Turning off the mic while I'm on call, sorry. Yes, I think that's a hugely interesting question. And yeah, we do definitely have a worldwide reputation for quality of produce. And I think that's going to be a big challenge as we move forward to keep that. I think that actually, if you look at the food and drink sector, it hasn't failed to innovate. I think we clearly need to continue to innovate, but we have very demanding consumers in the UK and Europe. I think that drives innovation in terms of products. I think also that the differing legislation around food and drink across the world also demands that people utilise technology and innovation to make sure they're meeting those requirements. I think there are some really interesting things happening in agriculture and food and drink at the moment. And one of the challenges that the farming community is having to face up to is that actually agriculture is a major polluter. But yet we do have this really high quality product. So how do we make sure that we are continuing to produce high quality product, but also reducing the emissions and CO2 that comes out of agriculture? And that's very much a focus now we're seeing across the farming bodies. I think the other areas are the changes in diet. And as we move increasingly to plant-based diets and to a need to create new forms of protein, I think there's some really exciting opportunities around the sort of juxtaposition of life science and food production as to what the new food forms we might start to utilize. And, you know, I see the change to a more plant-based diet as being driving a significant amount of innovation. We're seeing that partly in new products coming to market, new combinations of product. and also in terms of delivery methods, and actually lockdown has sort of accelerated that, so you've got companies like HelloFresh and Deliveroo and all those sorts of people in the food to the consumer supply market that is changing significantly, and that ties back very nicely to what Ruth was saying about, that's all about digital marketing, and I think it's also about making sure that you use data all the time to see what's working and what's not working. But I think then the final overlay on all of this goes back to what Michael's trying to do, which is the climate change agenda, which is driving the changes in agricultural production, but all the way through to what do we do with our waste? How can we create less waste? How do we track and trace that? How can we use new products? So people like Vegware, just outside Edinburgh, who now have all these, recyclable packaging solutions. How can we be smarter about that? So I don't think there's a lack of innovation, but I do think we need always to be open to it. And I think that access now to great data and new ways of dealing with it, machine learning, etc., actually enables us to get smarter about all of this. And I think if we can then have a focus on how do we use that to help that innovation process, then I think that's really valuable.
Thank you, Polly. Hugely good points. Michael, could I bring you in there?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I would echo Polly's points about we shouldn't, in terms of Scotland's reputation as a source of fantastic produce, we shouldn't kill the goose that lays the golden egg. So we have to be as careful about our environment as we are, if we think about it globally. So that's really important too, I think. So particularly as Polly was saying about the primary producers who are also making this amazing produce in this amazing environment, but clearly they have an impact in terms of the processing of that. But again, thinking about it from the producers, from the product companies that are packaging and selling all this amazing produce globally. I mean, certainly we're seeing some really interesting some interest there around definitely the use of data for looking at, okay, what happens to that material? Could we recover that material? Actually, are there substitute materials that we could use in the whole packaging kind of system as well? So there's a whole piece happening there that we're certainly seeing quite a lot of. I think in terms of the diet and where I'm related to beef farmers in the Scottish Borders, so I have to be very careful what I say here around this. So I think some of that again comes back to the quality of the the quality of the source, the quality of the production. Whether it's protein based or whether it's vegetable based, a lot of it does come back to that. So, and I think in terms of innovation and where that applies, clearly you've got innovation around the technology piece, but you've also got innovation around business models, and you've got innovation around process, and so I think there's a whole different levels at which innovation can work across the food and drink sector. It's not just a pure play sort of technology piece. I think there's a whole range of innovation around the way we treat our people, the way we treat our employees. There's a whole range of different ways I think we can innovate within the sector.
I think again that's a really interesting point. The technology, as we've often talked about, is an enabling force, and if we don't innovate across the entire system of the business, then we're not going to be doing it properly. In terms of the discussion today, another couple of questions we've been asked to consider are, what could the UK government do at that national level to help drive things forward, and what could the Scottish or other devolved governments do at the regional level to help drive change? I'm not sure if one of our panel would like to take that one first.
I don't mind kicking off on that one. I think the UK government, I think it's about investing support into small, medium-sized businesses in that sector. And I think giving them the resources and education to be able to, from my perspective, if you like, creating that online experience and taking that step to digital marketing. I think what's really interesting is what is arguably almost unique to this industry. It definitely, from my understanding, is an industry where tech adoption does happen, and happens much faster than it maybe does in other industries. But I'm not sure from a marketing perspective that it necessarily keeps up that well with it. And I think it's, there's obviously a lot of very, very positive and good stories, and I just wonder if there's a way that we could get a further reach with that, if you like. So I think that from the UK government perspective, equally keeping that campaign, that message around quality and sharing those stories of what we're doing to innovate in food and industry in the UK is really important. I think at a regional level, it's about each of us telling our own story, if you like, and about what our particular country is, you know, renowned or known for. But again, even bringing in inspirational leaders, business leaders from other industries to inspire food and drink companies to think about, actually, how can I expand my marketing? How can I grow that? How can I open up new marketing channels? Where are the opportunities? And then I think from a government level, through Scottish Enterprise Business Gateway, it's about providing the support and resources to help businesses actually implement that. And actually, just to flip back to the UK government, equally true for all governments, though, it's about making sure we have talent in that area. Maybe goes a bit backwards for me as a business owner, but essentially, if we have a lot of talent in the digital marketing and technology marketplace, then it means that with that competition, you've got access to that talent, but also tends to keep prices down. Whereas if you've got a scarcity of that, then, you know, companies and people will likely to charge more. So I think it's important that we're also encouraging people into that industry. Maybe after I've retired.
Well, so I mean, I think a couple of other points there are, particularly around the agri-tech side, is that quite a lot of the appliance of technology in the agriculture and food and drink sectors is innovative, and people tend to be a little loath to be at the forefront of technology adoption, you know, in case it doesn't work out. So I think that at a policy level, both UK and Scottish government could be supporting that technology adoption and helping to encourage it. And I think both governments do, but I'd love to see them continue to do that. I think the point about skills is absolutely valid in that, you know, we are moving people from very traditional skills into a whole range of new skills, giving them people those skills, training them up, and making sure our the courses that are delivered through our colleges, universities, and other organisations are absolutely up to date, I think is really important, and to help them to understand those new skill sets, particularly around data and the use of, for example, sensors and machine learning and those sorts of things. So I think that's really important, and I think that, you know, I think we will inevitably see a sort of campaign around buying locally. I think that there's a lot more can be done around that. We've seen that the impacts of the lockdown has been actually people have been pushed to buying locally, and some there's a buffalo farm up in Fife. You know, they were set up to develop mozzarella, but actually they were saying on something I was listening to the other day that they have never been busier. They've actually taken staff on throughout the lockdown because they've been doing so many consumer deliveries, which goes back to what Ruth was saying, is new channels to market. So I think we need to keep that whole emphasis on this is the high quality we provide, and actually we have always been a bit of a cheap food nation, and I think that's a mistake. So it's quite a difficult balance to get right. And the final thing that both governments can be doing, or all the governments can be doing, is continuing to support export opportunities, because, as you know, it's a hugely important part, particularly of the Scottish economy. And so I think we need a system that continues to make sure that happens at all levels.
Yeah, I'd echo both Ruth and Polly's points about digital enablement and the need to support that with skills, and right through from primary right the way through, definitely, because you can't manage what you can't measure. So you know, if we are going to use data better, we've got to be able to understand how to use data better, and what are the limitations of that data. You know, the data, what's the quality attached to that data. That's certainly a lot of work we do is just purely looking in the trenches, looking at the quality of the data, let alone what you can then do with that. I think the other piece, coming back to net zero and carbon policies and carbon emissions policies, I think you know, these are being increasingly more stringent, increasingly set at a sort of global level, and therefore, you know, we have to also support companies to be able to do their bit as well within that. A lot of companies are doing some really amazing work already. But again, some kind of enablement around how each of those companies can do their bit in order to not only support the policy goals, but actually benefit as a result as well, because it's not mutually exclusive economic and business success and greater impact in terms of carbon emissions and the environment.
Thank you. Gosh, we've got neatly answered with 3 minutes to spare. This has been fascinating for me. I think hearing about some of the innovation that's happening around vertical farming, around the use of robotics and AI and data, and how we have to consider a whole system approach to make this work in terms of driving and continuing to innovate in this sector is really interesting. The links with climate tech and carbon reduction are hugely important. I think, Polly, what you were saying about the changing consumer behaviours, probably accelerated by the whole period of lockdown, is really interesting and does present some unique opportunities as we go forward too, as well as some interesting challenges. Would any of you like to add any final comments or final points on this today?
I think the only thing I was thinking, sorry, Michael, about data, just very quickly to say, was that from a marketing perspective, my experience is that companies are very good at collecting data, but not as good at actually interpreting the data and actually applying it. So it's a personal bugbear of mine, the idea that, and with a lot of digital technology, I mean, there's nothing that you can't measure. You can get data coming out of your ears, but it's actually knowing how you want, what the data tells you, and then what your action to it is after that, because otherwise there's no point in having it. And it's also about data sharing. I think one of the nice things that have come out of this situation, we've seen businesses working much more collaboratively together, even more so than I think before this happened. And I think that's absolutely to be encouraged.
Michael.
Well, since we're in a food and drink mode, I would say I think we need to be optimistic, and I think so our glasses should be half full, not half.
Probably a good Scottish mould. But I guess my final comment would be to say that actually it sort of ties in with what Ruth's been saying. I do think we need to enable those digital skills at a whole range of different levels. And one of those entry levels actually is around e-commerce. And it has been those businesses who have been online or got online during the lockdown who have seen that pay off for them. And we have been a bit slow on that in Scotland as a whole. I think that's a range of skills we need to get out across all small businesses to help them get to market and get to new markets. And it's a relatively inexpensive way of doing that.
That's a hugely good point, Polly. And if anybody is listening and interested, if you have a look online, the Institute of E-Commerce in Scotland has been doing some interesting research into the supply side of e-commerce in Scotland and how that can be taken forward. And I think they will be coming out with a paper in the not too distant future on that. Polly, Michael, Ruth, thank you so much for your time and expertise today. It's been a pleasure to listen to you all, and I, for one, have learned a lot and have lots of food for thought. I didn't mean that. I do apologise for that. I wasn't meaning to make a dreadful pun, but thank you very much. I hope you'll stay with us for some of the sessions this afternoon. And please have a look at the polls that we are running, anybody that's listening. And thank you once again to our speakers. Thank you.
Thank you.